Welcome to Learning English, a daily 30-minute program from the Voice of America. I'm Jonathan Evans.
And I'm Ashley Thompson. This program is aimed at English learners, so we speak a little slower and we use words and phrases especially written for people learning English.
Today on the program, you will hear from Anna Mateo, Pete Musto, and Kelly Jean Kelly. Later, we will bring you part 1 of Jack London's The Law of Life in our series American Stories. But first, 2018 was a big year in the world of arts and culture. Some of the big events, however, had less to do with movies or music and more to do with politics or social issues. Here is a list of the top pop culture events this year, month by month. We begin in January. That month, the Golden Globes honored people working in television and the film industry. TV reporters often talk about movie stars and the clothes they wear to the awards show. This year, the clothing and discussion was different. Many of the women in attendance wore black. They did so in support of victims of sexual abuse. The Golden Globes was the first awards show since the start of the #MeToo movement against sex abuse. TV star and actor Oprah Winfrey gave a now famous speech while accepting an award. She talked of a future in which she hopes no one ever has to say "Me Too" again. The month of February brought movie lovers Black Panther, the superhero movie from Marvel Comics. The film tells the story of an imaginary African nation called Wakanda. It is the home of the Black Panther himself, Prince T'Challa. The film earned critical praise and a lot of money. In fact, it has become the 12th highest earning film of all time worldwide. It is also the most tweeted about movie ever.
At the Academy Awards show, also known as the Oscars, talk of the #MeToo movement continued where it left off at the Golden Globes. Winners' speeches centered on #MeToo. 3 women who accused Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein of abuse, an event that led to the movement, appeared together. And Best Actress winner Frances McDormand told the crowd she has some things to say. She asked all the women nominees in the room to stand and appealed to Hollywood to tell their stories. Things also were changing outside of Hollywood. In April, rap musician Kendrick Lamar won the Pulitzer Prize of Music for his record album, Damn. He became the first rapper to win the award, and the first who is not a classical or jazz artist. In May, the world's attention was on the marriage of Britain's Prince Harry and American actress Meghan Markle. The 36-year-old Markle was unlike the traditional image of a British princess. As one observer noted, Meghan is an American biracial divorcee who is an activist, a feminist, and former actress. The wedding ceremony broke from tradition in many ways. She wore an unusually simple wedding dress. During the ceremony, an American gospel group performed the song "Stand By Me," and an American clergyman realizing he was talking longer than planned, closed his speech by saying, "We gotta get y'all married."
June was marked by the suicide deaths of two well-known Americans. Chef, writer, and television personality Anthony Bourdain and fashion designer Kate Spade died within 2 days of each other. Their deaths came at a time when more Americans were dying from suicide than ever before. Their deaths also led to calls for more suicide prevention efforts in the United States and around the world. Last year, it was producer Harvey Weinstein. This year, it was Les Moonves, one of the most powerful men in U.S. television. Reporter Ronan Farrow broke the explosive story of sexual wrongdoing on the part of the chief of CBS television. Months later, he resigned from his high-level position. In August, the world mourned the loss of singer Aretha Franklin, the Queen of Soul. She was remembered not only for her singing ability, the greatest of a generation, but for her lifelong demand for respect as a woman and an African American. Her funeral was memorable. It lasted 8 hours.
Believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything, says a Nike advertisement released in September. The ad made waves because of the man saying those words, Colin Kaepernick, a former football player. Kaepernick began a series of protests among National Football League players against police violence and racial inequality. In October, the world saw singer Lady Gaga reinvent herself on the silver screen. Gaga starred opposite Bradley Cooper in the movie A Star is Born. The film was met with much public excitement and earned $100 million in U.S. theaters in just 12 days. It also earned critical praise and later 5 Golden Globe nominations. The film and its stars are widely expected to receive Oscar nominations. November brought the release of the film Bohemian Rhapsody. It tells the story of Queen, the British rock group that rose to worldwide fame in the 1970s. It especially centers on the life of lead singer Freddie Mercury, who died in 1991 from health problems connected to AIDS. While the film has not received high marks from critics, music lovers around the world seem pleased. The film made $600 million in its first 5 weeks, making it the most successful music biopic ever.
The Oscars are still a few months away, but talk of the awards is already underway. In fact, the Academy released its shortlist for 9 categories, including candidates for Best Foreign Language Film, earlier this month. As expected, Mexico's critically praised Roma is among them. Roma tells the story of the housekeeper for a middle-class family in Mexico City during the 1970s. Film critics also expect the film to compete for the Best Picture award. No foreign language film has ever won Best Picture at the Oscars. The full list of nominees will be announced January 22nd.
In 2006, a private museum in the African country of Benin presented artifacts from the ancient Dahomey Kingdom. Almost 250,000 people came to see them. But even though the pieces are part of the country's history, they did not belong to Benin. They were on loan from France, which colonized and ruled the country for over 60 years. Now, France has promised to give Benin back 26 artifacts taken by the French army in 1892. This may prove a major change for other African countries asking for their art to be returned. Marie-Cécile Zinsou is French Beninese. She is among Africa's strongest supporters of returning African art that has been taken. Her Zinsou Foundation hosted the Dahomey exhibit in 2006. She told VOA she believes if Benin succeeds in showing its cultural history, major changes will be possible. Then you'll have a real example of how African countries are getting their heritage back and showing it to the public. Then people will believe, said Zinsou.
Up to 90% of African artifacts are located outside the continent. That includes in France, where an estimated 90,000 African artifacts are housed in French museums. Most are in the Quai Branly Jacques Chirac Museum in Paris. But some recent events show change may be coming. Last year, French President Emmanuel Macron promised to temporarily or permanently return artifacts to the continent within 5 years. And in November, 2 researchers delivered a report asked for by Macron. It recommended France permanently return objects taken through theft, looting, despoilment, trickery, and forced consent. Senegalese economist Felwine Sarr and French historian Bénédicte Savoy wrote the report. In it, they noted that 60% of the population of the African continent is under the age of 20. Young people should be able to enjoy and learn about their own culture, creativity, and spirituality from other eras, they wrote.
The report has had an effect. In December, the United Nations General Assembly put a resolution in place supporting returning objects to their home countries. The British Museum has also promised to return priceless metal artifacts to Nigeria. And Germany is helping Kenya find its valuable stolen artifacts that ended up in Western museums, including German ones. Some experts are not so sure about the moves. We know the shortage in African museums of quality conservation, art expert Alexandre Giquelot told the Agence France Presse news agency. France's culture minister supports loaning artifacts to Africa rather than permanent returns. Quai Branly Museum head Stéphane Martin described the report on returning art as a bad answer. He told Le Figaro newspaper there were other ways to support cultural exchange with Africa. Meanwhile, new museums are either being built or planned to be built across Africa. Supporters say the new museums disprove the arguments that the continent cannot properly house its heritage.
Returning art to places whose borders have changed over the years presents still other problems. Charlene Kopf is a doctoral researcher at the University of Oslo. She noted that current claims for the return of artifacts are being made by a number of African nations. But sometimes such claims are also made by indigenous communities who do not accept some border divisions. Robert Jonard sells African artifacts in Paris. He says smaller dealers like himself are not worried they may lose ownership of their most valued pieces. It's mostly a discussion at a higher level, among leading experts and museum heads, he says. Instead, Jonard is worried about returning valuable artifacts to places where they risk being stolen or badly cared for. Consider what might happen to French museums if all the art Napoleon plundered in Italy was sent home, Jonard adds. What will remain in the world's museums if each country asks for its art back? I'm Kelly Jean Kelly.
And I'm Pete Musto.
And now we present The Law of Life by Jack London. Part 1.
Old Kashkush listened greedily. Although his sight had failed, his hearing remained good. The slightest sound was recognized by a mind yet active behind the aged forehead. Ah, that was Sitkamha, shouting curses at the dogs as she beat them into the harnesses. Sitkamha was his daughter's daughter, but she was too busy to waste a thought upon her old grandfather, sitting alone there in the snow. Camp must be broken. The long trail waited while the short day refused to delay. Life called her, and the duties of life, not death. And he was very close to death now. The thought frightened the old man for a moment. He stretched forth a shaking hand, which wandered over the small pile of dried wood beside him. Reassured that it was there, his hand returned to the shelter of his old, worn furs. He again began to listen. He heard the noise of the half-frozen animal skins being moved. He knew that even then the chief's moose-skin tent was being packed. The chief was his son, leader of the tribesmen and a mighty hunter. As the women worked, his voice rose, exclaiming at their slowness. Old Kaskush strained his ears. It was the last time he would hear that voice. There went Greenhouse tent, and Tuskens. 7, 8, 9. Only the medicine man's could yet be standing. There, they were at work upon it now. He could hear the medicine man struggling loudly as he piled it on the sled. A child cried, and a woman calmed it with gentle singing. Little Cootie, the old man thought. That child was always weeping, and it was sickly. It would die soon, perhaps, and they would burn a hole through the frozen ground and pile rocks above to keep the wolves away. And what difference would it make? A few years at best, and as many an empty stomach as a full one. And in the end, death waited, ever hungry and hungriest of them all. What was that? Oh, the men binding the sleds together and drawing tight the ropes. He listened, he who would listen no more. The whips whistled among the dogs. Hear them howl! How they hated the work and the trail through the snow. They had started. Sled after sled moved slowly away into the silent forest. And they were gone. They had passed out of his life, and he faced the last bitter hour alone. No. The step of a moccasin broke the snow surface. A man stood beside him. Upon his head a hand rested gently. His son was good to do this thing. He remembered other old men whose sons had not waited after the tribe had gone, but his son had. The old man's thoughts wandered away into the past, until the young man's voice returned him to the present. "It is well with you?" he asked. The old man answered, "It is well." "There is wood beside you," the younger man continued, "and the fire burns bright. The morning is gray, and the cold has lessened. It will snow presently. Even now it is snowing." "Yes, even now it is snowing." "The tribesmen hurry. Their loads are heavy and their stomachs empty with lack of feasting. The trail ahead is long, and they travel fast. I go now. Is it well?" "It is well. I am as the last year's leaf hanging lightly on a branch. When the first wind blows, I fall. My voice has become like an old woman's. My eyes no longer show me the way of my feet, and my feet are heavy, and I am tired. It is well." He bowed his head in contentment until the last noise of the moccasin on the snow died away. He knew his son was beyond recall. Then his hand moved out from the furs to touch the wood. It alone stood between him and what lay beyond the death that opened before him. Now the measure of his life was a handful of sticks. One by one they would go to feed the fire, and just so, step by step, death would come closer to him. When the last stick had given all of its heat, the frost would begin to gather strength. First his feet would yield, then his hands, and the lack of feeling would travel slowly to his body. His head would fall forward upon his knees, and he would rest. It was easy. All men must die. He did not murmur. It was the law of life, and it was just. He had been born close to the earth, and close to the earth had he lived. Its law was not new to him. It was the law of all flesh. Nature was not kindly to the flesh. She had no concern for that single thing called the individual. Her interest lay in the race of man as a whole. He grasped this idea firmly. He saw its truth displayed everywhere. The awakening of life in a tree, the bursting greenness of its branches, the fall of the yellow leaf. In this alone was told the whole history. But one task nature did give the individual. Did he not perform it, he died. Did he perform it? It was all the same. He died. Nature did not care. There were plenty who would obey. It was only the need that this duty be obeyed, not the man who obeyed it, which lived and lived always. The tribe of Kashkush was very old. The old men he had known when he was a boy had known old men before them. Therefore it was true that the tribe lived, that it represented the obeying of all its members, whose final resting places were unremembered. They were not important. They were chapters in life's story. They had passed away like clouds from a summer sky. He also would pass away. Nature did not care. To life she gave one task and one law. To continue the race was the task of life. Its law was death. A young girl was a good creature to look upon, full-breasted and strong, with a lightness to her step and a shine in her eyes. But her task was yet before her. The light in her eyes brightened and her step quickened. She laughed with the young men, then she turned away. She passed on to them her own unrest, and she grew fairer and yet fairer to look upon. Finally, some hunter took her to his tent to cook and work for him, and to become the mother of his children. And with the coming of her children, her beauty left her. She dragged her legs and arms when she walked. Her eyes lost their brightness. Then only the little ones found joy in the old lined face. Her task was done. In a little while, in the first famine or in the first long trail, she would be left, as he had been left in the snow, with a little pile of wood. Such is the law. He placed a stick carefully on the fire and returned to his thoughts. It was the same everywhere, with all things. The insects disappeared with the first frost. When age settled upon the rabbit, it became slow and heavy and could no longer run faster than its enemies. Even the big bear grew old and blind, to be dragged down at last by a small group of barking sled dogs. He remembered how he had left his own father along the Klondike River one winter. It was the winter before the missionary came with his books and his box of medicines. Many times Kashkush had recalled with pleasure the taste of those medicines. The one called painkiller was especially good. But now his mouth refused to moisten. He remembered that the missionary had become a worry to them. He brought no meat into the camp, and he ate much. The hunters did not like this. Then, when they were near the Mayo, he became ill, and afterward the dogs pushed the stones away and fought for his bones.
And that's our program for today. Listen again tomorrow to learn English through stories from around the world. I'm Jonathan Evans.
And I'm Ashley Thompson.